welcome everyone to this webinar where we will talk about mostly the pEATIC training, where also part of the MIMA training is nowadays incorporated. So with me, I have Ilka parent, and I think you all know me, so maybe if you don't, I am Katarina Lundgren, and I am the director of MIMA Center. And please also, when we talk, just interrupt us, and if you have questions, you can write in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and then basically just ask us. So we want to tell a little bit about the training that we are offering. And especially we've been asked for Ilka to be here, as she is the authority of trauma therapy with horses from many different angles. So I'm happy you're here, Ilka. Would you share a little bit about yourself?
Definitely. I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I have to smile when you call me the authority. I'm like,
I know you do.
God. I mean, what I can say, I hate titles. I do have a bunch of titles. I've studied psychology. I'm a licensed trauma therapist. And that's the most important thing to know about me. I've been working with trauma, kind of slipped into that, working with combat-related trauma, and then specializing more into all kinds of developmental trauma and trauma. And I've had this passion to incorporate horses onto the team since I was a little girl. So I needed to come up with a model that is accredited by the licensing boards, because as a licensed psychotherapist, there's obviously rules and regulations that I needed to adhere to, and yet I wasn't willing to give up on having horses on the team. So that's what I've done, and this is what Katarina, Ali, and I are going to talk about today a little bit, the training that we're offering. But to call me an authority, I hate to come back to that, but it's like, no, I'm just a regular human. I love horses. I love working with trauma, as weird as that may sound, and I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you.
I knew you would react to that, but you have all the titles. So here we go. I'm going to share a presentation that we put together, and we mostly have it just to not forget what we wanted to bring up. So we're going to introduce pEATIC and what we nowadays call EATIC or EATIC, which is Equine Assisted Trauma Informed Care, and it's basically the former Equine Therapy and Learning program. So this is a picture of the certification process that we have for pEATIC and what I call the accreditation process for the EATIC part. We spent many months to put this together. A lot of hard work to take two different trainings that have a lot of similarities, but also have some differences, to put them together. And Ilka, why did we put them together?
MIMA and I, as in Minds in Motion, we've collaborated before on quite a few symposiums where the equine welfare was at the forefront of the interest. So I was looking for collaboration because in our field, there's a lot of competition. And as we were recording the training for pEATT, we realized that there was a lot of similarities in the trainings, that structurally there was differences, but content-wise, we found that a lot of it was complementary, if not repetitive. And so what we did is pick out the best parts, pick out the things that were the clearest, and design it from there. So it's a combination of things that people who have attended trainings from either Katarina or I before, they will see some of the elements that they have learned before, but it is much richer, and it is rounded off a lot more by putting these two things together.
And basically the idea is that the people attending these trainings will get so much more because they get it from what you have offered from before and from what MIMA has offered from before.
One of the things that we come from different backgrounds. My background is from the psychotherapy, clinical psychotherapy, and your background is from having worked with the horses, having vast knowledge in psychology, but not having those numbers and titles behind the name. And so the target population has been different for both of us. And by combining the two trainings, again, it expands it to where it offers the detailed and in-depth information for a large variety of groups.
Yeah, exactly. Even though we have had some disagreements on how to do this, because we have different approaches, I think the outcome or the result of it is I'm really pleased, and I think it's really good. And we are happy that we can share it with you who are here today. And we just basically run the first part one, started in January, and the second one we start in May. So this is the structure for it. As you see, there are 4 different modules. So module 1 has 3 parts. So you can sign up to just the first part if you want to try it out and you don't know if this is for you. But you can also sign up to the bundle of all the parts in module 1. And the first one contains the basic, the fundamentals, and lots of information about horses. And lots of people have taken the EATL before, they will recognize it. And the second part is more about trauma, and the military part that you mentioned, Ilka, about combat-related trauma. And part 3 is how to put all of that into practice, because the module 2 is a practical in-person skill set training. And then, because who are you really addressing with your training, Ilka, when you go on to the trauma confrontation in module 3?
Particularly, I'm addressing clinical psychotherapists or psychotherapists, people from the mental health population who are licensed and who are already trained in trauma. Okay, because in module 3.1, we focus more in depth on the trauma confrontative parts, how to work with the horses on the team. Again, they're always part of this. But the various trauma confrontative techniques, for instance, like EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, as one of the many, people need to be certified in that before they can actually learn how to work with horses with that. So I always specify this is not a trauma therapeutic training where you, even though it is about trauma, it covers a lot about trauma and trauma confrontative techniques, it would be ludicrous to offer an online training like that with horses and with the team and with the different adaptations on how to work equine assisted. And then say, okay, by that you're certified then in trauma. So no, this is definitely the focus, equine assisted. So people need to be certified as certified licensed mental health professional, trained in trauma therapy and trained in EMDR. And as far as coming from the equine world, there needs to be knowledge, but I think then the training does provide a lot of the perspective, the requirements. You need to have at least 5 years experience with horses, not necessarily riding, but in the horse care. But we do address in module 3.1 the specifics of how to work with horses to where they're able to work in trauma confrontations.
Yeah, it's basically trauma focused. It's about confronting, working with the phase 2, if we talk about the trauma, phase 1, 2, and 3 that many people know about. Like, because if you want to still work with trauma and support people who has had trauma, but not go into these different trauma confrontative techniques that you talk about, and the EMDR, for example. We also offer, from the MEMR perspective, module 3.2, where we go even more into trauma sensitive and trauma informed care, being about stabilization and resources and grounding, where you in your module part of the module brings more into the phase 2 trauma treatment with the actual confrontation. That's correct.
That is correct.
Yeah. And then module 4 builds on this, that if you go towards the actual trauma focused work, you can gain a certification in pEATIC.
Yep.
Yeah, and if you stay with working with the more generalized trauma-informed care, equine assisted, you can become an accredited MEMER facilitator and potentially a trainer if you're interested in that.
So to stress this again, this is to accommodate the people with the different backgrounds, because overall the focus to be trauma informed nowadays is, I think a lot of us, if not all of us, will agree, is a necessity, because we just have too many. You guys are far closer to war conflict than I am in Germany. Unfortunately, it's something that is touching our everyday lives. I don't think it matters where you are, it touches it. So the impact of trauma and being trauma aware and being trauma sensitive in regards to what does it look like in people, what are some of the requirements that are needed to ensure safety, emotional safety for people who've experienced trauma is very, very important in our field. Again, the split with module 3.1 and 3.2 is to accommodate the different population groups that will hopefully, or that have attended our trainings, because not everybody is a certified trauma therapist. Not everybody is a licensed clinical mental health professional. So without losing any of the content, we decided to split it up and address it from the different perspectives, giving the opportunity to participants to either be accredited in this, in what is being learned, or if they're licensed, then certified in working this way.
And both are equally important, I would say, because we have so many people needing services, and you point out that being trauma sensitive and trauma informed is super important in our field, I would say, in any field working with humans. And from where I stand, there is a huge lack. And there is this idea that you can go to a weekend course and become trauma informed, and you put a stamp on your services and say, now I know this. And we really, whichever modules you delve into, you will gain a lot of information about trauma from so many different angles and what actual being trauma informed means. I think you can say that as a basis for it. And then there are just different levels of working with it, as you say, depending on your profession. Yeah.
And it goes against the notion that there's, unfortunately, so many people think that just by adding horses, there's suddenly competency to work with any kind of population. And we strongly go against that. There's the way we work with horses, we'll get into that in a little bit, differs, I believe, greatly from other models and methods. Just by adding a horse does not give anybody else the competency to work with trauma.
No.
So.
No, thanks for pointing that out. So Ilka, what is pEATIC?
Yeah, we keep talking about pEATT and we keep talking about certifications. Like, what is this actually?
Yeah.
So my background is psychoanalysis, and I lived in the States for 20 years. Returning back to Germany, I couldn't get licensed in psychoanalysis because I needed to do more hours than I had the time to do. It already took 7 years to get the full license here. So I'm only licensed in so-called depth or psychodynamic psychology, which looks at the psychodynamics in a person. So the work that I've been doing with the horses is obviously colored and views things from a psychodynamic perspective. And this is the way the name was developed, the psychodynamic equine assisted trauma therapy. Since my return to Germany, now it's been 11 years from the get-go, because we had pet therapy, we had riding, we had hippotherapy here, but there was no equine assisted psychotherapy here. So I put at the time I was an EGALA trainer, so I put a lot of energy into making this popular. And from the get-go, I pushed for it to get researched, because in our field, there's such a variability. There's so many people who, I was joking just a minute ago, let's add a horse and we suddenly can do trauma work. Just because we have a horse, we can work with groups. And because we have horses there, we work with ADHD. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of this going on, that there's so many different providers teaching all kinds of things by having horses on the team, that the variability in our field is huge, which hurts us all. In the sense, insurance companies who are funding most of the time, if you're a licensed clinician, insurance companies rightly are saying, it varies from person to person to person. So why should we fund it if there's no common ground? So as I said from the get-go, I've put a lot of emphasis on getting the work that I was doing researched, and I was lucky to find interest in the Psychotrauma Center of the German military. So for the past 12 years now, there's been ongoing studies, and there's other studies that I'm always involved in, to where we've collected data, to where by now there's actually publications on pEATT, on the psychodynamic equine-assisted trauma therapeutic model, to where hopefully as more people continue to work by those standards, it will add numbers, it will add validity to what is already there, which hopefully, that's my goal, in the maybe next 20 years, insurance companies are finally going to say, okay, we believe in the data. It takes 20 years for any kind of model to be actually researched well enough for insurance companies to start developing an interest. So that's my goal, that hopefully at one point all over the world, there will be enough scientific support to it, which will help people get services and providers being paid for it. What else is pEATT? I've been mentioning method, model, approach. pEATT is a model, okay, in that it gives a structured, replicable way of working in assessment of people, in the treatment of people, and then, as I was saying, in giving numbers on that it can be validated by the research. It is not an approach. There's a lot of confusion a lot of times. Approaches is like the psychodynamic or psychoanalysis. That's an approach, okay? That's a long, drawn-out process that explains how to work with people, which has been scientifically researched and has been looked at from all kinds of angles. So pEATT is not an approach. It is also not a method. It is a model that includes different methods and builds on approaches and methods and incorporates them in its model. What is specific about the model is what I call the quadrant approach, which means that the horses, the clients, and each treatment team member are on the same level, which may sound so simple, but a lot of times horses are being instrumentalized. Okay, I keep bringing up the example of, I have a horse, let me do trauma work. And let's get the horse. The horse is representative for peace. And why don't you go pet the horse so you get comfort? And then we call it that we've done trauma therapy. That is not taking into account what the horse is actually wanting in that situation. So when I say the horse is being equal to and part of the treatment team as equal, it means if you just in your mind go by the example, if you work with somebody in a team as a colleague and a client comes up and starts to pet your teammate, would that be okay? I think not. So that is the horse being on the same level. What throws a lot of people off is that the client is on the same level. And that is that's part of the psychodynamic approach, that the client has all the answers to him or herself, within him or herself, that symptoms, a client is never dysfunctional, but a client is very functional based on the life experience. And we are there to facilitate that process, but not to give advice or to tell another person how to do it. And that's why the quadrant approach is basically a cube with 4 pillars that each one carries as much as the next one, and no one is more important than the other one. And that kind of summarizes that pEATT is a model that really attempts to, and we're not perfect, but at least aims to take all beings, humans and horses, humans, clients, co-workers, it doesn't matter, we're all humans, and horses, their welfare and well-being, including our own, into consideration.
Yeah, and you mentioned before that there is also other methods involved in pEATT.
Absolutely.
Would you care to mention some of them?
Well, just from the trauma therapeutic approach, I mentioned EMDR. EMDR is definitely a method. And I do incorporate, when it comes to the trauma work, the stabilization techniques. pEATT resorts to utilizing them and teaching on how to add horses to that. Okay.
Yeah. And you use some other methods as well, and that you will learn about if you enter the training, basically.
Yeah.
Oh, it's all.
Well, we at least broach it. We're not, like I said, we're not going to teach EMDR.
No.
EMDR needs to be known unless one is from the equine professional side, because then it's just the work with the horse and not the EMDR. But we definitely address it, and in the pEATT training, address what is needed to incorporate working with the horses on the treatment team.
So there is, as you mentioned, people need to know and be certified in using the EMDR protocol before they enter the training, but then how to apply it in the setting of horses in this work is what's included.
In the module 3, not before.
No. So module 1 and module 2 is open for everyone, basically. It's the same. If you come from Minds in Motion or from Mimer or wherever you come from and whatever background you have, and you want to learn more about this way of working. So I will just shortly mention the EATIC part here. As I said, it is the former EATL program training. So it's applying a trauma-informed care approach, or applying it to any kind of equine and even nature-assisted intervention. So this is the Mimer mission of making basically anything trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed in this field. And we base it as much as we can on existing science, and we try to be involved in some smaller. We haven't come as far as Ilka with her training or her model being involved in research, but we have been part in a kind of smaller research projects, and we constantly are open for that, because we share the idea that this needs to be researched, all of it. And we build the work on the quadrant approach from pEATT, and also from some other really important parts of pEATT. So if you have taken a training with Mimer before and you would enter this new training, you would recognize most of it. It's how you work with things. And the same, that we take all beings, humans, horses, their well-being and welfare into consideration. Do you want to guide us through this, Ilka? It's a little bit of a repetition of the first picture.
It is a repetition, but you'll hear it from a different person. Module 1 is the fundamentals. So it is basically what is necessary to incorporate horses on the treatment team. And it guides you step by step through the individual processes of facilitating an equine assisted session. What I'm very, very happy about is the additions. When I wasn't sure yet that Mimer and I were going to collaborate, despite a large focus on the horses, I was still thinking, okay, there's stuff missing. So by putting the two trainings together, now it has, in my opinion, very good basis of information when it comes to horses, because a lot of times there's this saying, a horse is a horse, of course. And everybody, and at least the English-speaking people, know that saying. And there's a TV show about that. And I think most of us enter this field because of our love for horses. And yet I believe that horses a lot of times are not, they're seen through thick glasses. They're seen through so much. Our history of being with horses is so enriched by our experiences that I have found, despite good intentions, there's still a lot of misconceptions about horses. So Module 1 focuses on these elementals. It offers a very, very good foundation to be working in the equine-assisted field. In that, it prepares them for Module 2. Module 1 is theoretical, it's online. And Module 2 then is not only an in-hand skill set training, a live skill set, experiential skill set training, where one can experience what has been learned in Module 1, but it also fortifies it and enhances it by focusing in on the emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is a part of any trauma therapeutic process, because emotions are what affect us. Emotions are what are considered to be compromised when there's trauma, in the sense that people become overwhelmed, okay? So as Katarina Ali was mentioning, there's phases in trauma therapy. I look at it as there's one giant phase in trauma therapy, which is stabilization, and emotional regulation is a huge, huge part of that. So Module 2 allows for people to experience things for themselves that they heard and learned about in Module 1, while focusing in on how to facilitate stabilization through emotional regulation for others. So it's quite intensive. It's another 4-day person training. And then, like I said, like we talked about, it's a split off in Module 3. What I then in pEATT focus on is how to work further in the trauma confrontation to be able to process traumatic materials, while Katarina in her parts in the Module 3.2 continues to look at stabilization, grounding, and resourcing. And Module 4, respectively, offer both parts is done either the certification, which is, again, a practical training in comparison to Module 3, which is online. Module 4 is practical, again, either the certification or the accreditation in the respective work.
Thank you. And please, if you have any questions or reflections so far, unmute yourself or write something in the chat, and we will grab you where you're at in your thought process or your questions around this. I will continue. So who is this for, Ilka?
Everyone.
Everyone.
Everyone, at least Module 1. I do believe it will enhance anybody who is already working in the equine-assisted or equine-facilitated field, or who has an interest in this field, and then to become more specialized, depending on what the background is. It does offer these different pathways to continue to expand the knowledge in equine-assisted trauma work.
So it's basically open for anyone who wants to work in this field and never been doing it, and it's kind of a newbie to it. But it's also open for anyone who's been working for 10, 15, 20 years in this field and want to enhance their knowledge about how to be working with trauma, either trauma sensitive and informed for everyone, or trauma focused, if you have the right certifications for that. And just mentioning the last bullet point here, we also do always welcome researchers and students who are curious about this and want to do some more research. Why do we do this?
I kind of went into it at the beginning, but I will repeat that too. The variability in the equine-assisted, whatever you want to call it, world essentially leads to a lack of established research standards. And I can't count the number of people, or let's put it this way, the inquiries is huge. People definitely would like to come And I do work in private practice as well. And my experience is that the equine-assisted pEATT, the equine-assisted trauma therapy, shortens treatment time by at least 7/8. So what is that? That's over 80%. One of the research I'm involved in right now is comparing EMDR, equine-assisted EMDR, and in-office EMDR. And again, what I see overall, over and over again, is it just shortens treatment time. But of course, it's more expensive. So there's a lot of people who don't get paid. And there's a lot of people who can't afford it or can only afford it at a reduced setting because it's just not accredited by the funding insurance companies or by funders. And so this is what I mean by it's hurting everybody. So this is an attempt. I mentioned the other one that's already written on there, but so I won't repeat it again. But this was my drive. What started out for me to start offering trainings is that I cannot, my team, I have a fantastic team. I have wonderful horses on the team and good humans too. And we cannot accommodate the high amount of people who really would benefit from that. It would be ludicrous. So I started offering these trainings to make it more accessible to people. It is an effort to raise the professionalism, and due to the structure, due to the research, it's a very structured approach. It is replicable. It can be repeated, and that has been researched. So it is an attempt to really raise the quality and the standard in our field in regards to equine-assisted psychotherapy and equine-assisted trauma therapy in particular.
And part of this is, you say, this mission and this need or want and desire to get it out to the people who actually need this kind of services. And part of Mimer's approach here is that we also then want to train more people in how to do it, and regardless of where you are in the world and what kind of financial geographic background you have, to make it as accessible for people to take these trainings, because that would make it possible for more people to receive the services, basically. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A question that we don't mention here, because you say that the EMDR with horses shortens the time, basically being more effective than the in-room version. Would you also say that it's more emotionally safe to work with the horses in contrast to in office, or that has nothing to do with it?
That's a loaded question.
I know.
A lot of people will experience it or will report back. Let's put it this way. A lot of people will report back that they are experiencing it as safer. Okay, to proclaim that it is safe in trauma work, the word safe alone is such a loaded word that I refrain from advertising anything as safe.
No, safer.
Well, that's why I will give back what has been given back to me as far as describing persons' experiences. What can be generalized is by engaging more senses, just by being engaged more with more of the entire being and not being in a confined setting. Oftentimes, will just by going through more sensory channels will lead to a different response in clients than sitting in an office and here we go into the psychodynamics, when the relationship to the therapist plays such a big role and has such a big effect on the client in the work. So just by having a non-human in a non-confined setting definitely makes and has a big effect on the person.
Because it's a lot about the relational work, and here you have the horses entering that space.
Yeah. Relational work, relational trauma oftentimes is part of the trauma, and so the relational level is being expanded by more and adding a non-human to that. Often, that's as general as I will say it. I know I'm tap dancing.
I just I know. I was going to put you on there.
Yeah. So it definitely has an effect. But I do want to add here, a lot of times clients will come to this expecting some kind of pet therapy. And I alluded to it earlier, saying that, oh, I find it comforting when I can pet a horse and the horse is there to take care of me and the horse is going to give my answer. And pEATT is definitely not about that. Okay. It is psychotherapy with each team member, including, again, the horse on the same level, having a set area of responsibilities, set qualities, and set abilities that they're taking to the treatment, including the client too, with his or her abilities. So to go back to your answer, it expands that field. It just makes the fields bigger that we can work in, everybody can work in, as far as client and treatment team.
Thank you for bringing that up, because there is a lot of misconceptions, as I see it, in the field of the role of the horse in this work. So if you would like to take this training, what would you gain from it? We'll be touching upon it, just to conclude it a little bit.
As we've alluded to, it's a very structured and solid training in a well-researched model on how to accompany people who have experienced traumatic events in a trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed, and trauma-focused equine-assisted interventions. And by attending the training, also you get the theoretical foundations and core concepts that are necessary to do that. So in the online trainings, I've tried to put as many detailed case examples and videos in there to prepare you for hands-on for the hands-on work, which is done in the module 2. Attending the training, attending all parts of the training, I think it is an all-rounded education and preparation to then work efficiently in equine-assisted trauma therapy with a select group of clients, particularly those who have been traumatized, either on the relational level or also combat-related, but also singular trauma.
There is supervision included. Not exactly in the beginning of the training, because you need to learn some things first, but there is accompanying through the training, and there is a lot of people from different parts of the world here, so there is this international groups forming, which is again supporting everybody, I think, and the access to this network of people who are really dedicated and passionate about getting good services out and good trainings out. And you do get to, if you follow the EATIC part, because as you said, Ilka, before, even if you have a great team and both humans and horses, not everybody can come to you for therapy. You need more people doing this kind of work. And I see it as the same thing as on the trainer education level. If you are really dedicated and go through these trainings, we will ask you if you are interested in becoming a MIMA trainer, just to be more of us who get this out, basically. So you can always reach out to any one of us and ask more questions. And if they are pEATT related, you are the one that answers best on those questions, and I can take the EATIC ones. If it's about the training, we both will answer questions, of course.
Gladly.
Yeah. And these are your horses. Yeah. So if you don't have any questions related to something that we bring up in here, or you have, and I welcome you to reflections and questions on whatever level or from whatever perspective, basically.
I have a question about the time frame. To what we need to consider about the time, how long each model takes, how long is the practical work, and what is about the time management? How do you see how long, or what time do we need to take for all these models, or how?
That's a very good question, and as Katarina was mentioning before, we just had Module 1 start in January, and I was convinced that for each part of just Module 1, a month would suffice, and it does not. Feedback feedback from participants are saying that it's a very extensive training in terms of self-exploration, which is the invitation, because I will give this away to because the basis is psychodynamic. A large part of the focus is also bringing people closer to their own perceptions, their own anticipation, their own biases. So part of the training literally is set up as a learning experience about oneself. So because of this feedback, we still want to have the training start in cohorts. So we have set starting dates, but instead of limiting the access to the training, we have decided that the training will remain. Once you've purchased access to it, you retain access to it. It's like a book. Okay, you purchase a book, you get to keep the book. So I still think it is possible, if one is dedicated to that as a student, to do this in a month per part for module 1, because each module has between 10 and 12 hours. The self-reflection parts take longer. Okay.
What people 10 to 12 hours of recorded video.
Of recorded videos, yes. It depends on the work, on their employment status, okay? People who are fully employed, it's taken them, I think, more like 6 weeks per part of module 1. Module 2 is hands-on. We have like a 2-hour online stuff introduction for module 2, we want for people to come together and really experience things and not spend it having lip noises. So there's about 2 hours online, and then we have 4 days of hands-on live trainings. 4 days. Module 3, again, is online, about the same volume as module 1. And the certification, at least for pEATT, it depends on how many teams come. We need to have at least 3 teams. So the time frame is set for 1.5 days. But if we have more teams, we add on without increasing the price. We just want to make sure that what has been learned and is understood well enough that we can certify people. In the interim, there's supervision hours. Okay, so between module 2 and module 3, there is supervision because people need to practice. And protocols need to be submitted. So the Minds of Motion team can keep tabs of it. And then between module 3 and the certification, again, there needs to be people practicing, applying what they've learned. So overall, okay, it's about a year-long process, at least, I would say. If somebody's really pushing through. Then as far as logistics, we will come to countries to give trainings. Not everybody, I'm in Germany, so, not everybody is able to come to Germany, but at the same time, we can't go to a country when there's only 5 participants. So it's always a shuffle between making it affordable for everybody. Okay. I don't know how many of you work full-time. I have a full-time private practice. So if I leave to give a training, it needs to be worth the time, because my work is going to double, not working basically. My work is not going to be done for me. I need to catch up on it. So that interferes in the timing process as well, obviously. So I hope that was a long-winded but concise enough answer.
And I can add, because some of you have taken or are underway of taking the old EATL version of the training, and it will be shorter for you because you will recognize some of it. Mm-hmm. So that would be a faster process for you. There will also be a reduction because you already paid for some of it. So.
That's important, okay? That these trainings, I mean, okay, we're not giving it away for free. I will be honest about this, okay? Katarina was saying we just in time for the recordings was months and months and months, and the training is being translated. We have 11 translators so far, and so there's there's so much work. But at the same time, the aim is, at least from our perspective, is to educate. Education cannot be free because then it's not valued. But to get rich on this is not the aim, you know. So there is absolutely reductions, because from my understanding with the Erasmus Project, there's already been money being spent. So this is not to double bill or anything like that. It is to, we figured at a rate of, I think it was 32 euros per educational hour, right? Which is, you know, in Germany.
Which doesn't include all the written texts or assignments or all that. It's just for the video recording.
We're just charging for basically the instructor time, you know, and are adding a bunch of resources. We want for people to be able to work ethically and correctly, so we're, like we said, the well-being of everybody involved is ensured, or at least set the ground for. So there's a reduction. Long story short, I talk too much.
No, you don't. There is a lot here. So
I know.
Yeah. Thanks for your question, Eva.
Yeah.
I have a question about this certification in trauma therapy. So I work as a psychotherapist, but I'm not certified trauma therapist. So what would be your suggestion? I mean, what courses you suggest? Do you have any suggestions for this field? So maybe you have some
recommendations.
Right,
because what is your background? Is it cognitive behavioral? Is it psychodynamic, psychoanalytical, or what type?
Gestalt.
Nice. Okay. Because I don't know your country, I'll be very honest. Okay. I think in trauma work, it's always important to be very aware of the cultural aspects. I mentioned earlier that I lived in the United States for 20 years, and so between Germany and the US, I was like, spend half of my life in each country. So picking the trauma approach that I encourage you to learn needs to be fitted to your core education and also your culture. So I don't have a recommendation other than I recommend picking something that suits your style of work. Okay, that's very important. And there's good ones out there. To me, I picked there's a comparison. It's the German, sorry, brain cramp, pEATIC, the German Psychotrauma Therapeutic Association, but they have an equivalency for Europe. But I can't think of the name right now. So this is the standard that I picked because I am in Europe now, so I wanted to make sure that it adheres to the European standards. Okay.
Now that is an additional trauma training you have on top of you being a psychotherapist, Ilka.
Say that again, please.
That's an additional training you have on top of being a psychologist and a psychotherapist. This is a trauma part, the trauma therapy part, yeah.
Yes. And I will add that my trauma therapeutic training took a year. Okay, again, there's a lot of trainings that are being offered for, let's do a training here for 4 days here and another 3 days there, and you're a trauma therapist. Okay, my training to become a psychotherapist took 15 years, and so trauma therapy was another year on top of that. I encourage people to pick trainings that are researched and founded, and adhere to at least the country's standards, or I would ask the licensing board in your country if there's any recommendations. So I apologize for not knowing more specifics about your country, but that's the best I can say.
Yeah, I was more interested actually Europe-wise because I have training also that is not from Latvia, so I'm kind of...
Yeah, you are trained from the European Gestalt.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I will look up, once we post this video, I will have looked up to the equivalency of the association that I belong to, which is the European standard. And that's what I did back then. I went to that organization and I looked at certified training curricula by them, and that's what I picked them.
Okay, thank you.
And this is required if you want to be certified in pEATT, to have this beforehand. Yeah.
But again, I mean, I think the training modules that we offer they're very, very good. I honestly believe that and stand by it, not to self-promote, because they're just good. But it doesn't replace a trauma therapeutic training.
And it's for psychotherapists' sake as well as for clients, because it's not an easy work to do.
Yes, yes.
It's for everyone, yeah.
So I have a question. Since me and Selga are part of MIMER training and in this project, so I wonder, in the context of your model, what do the equine professionals gain, and can they actually, well, say rudely, does it make sense to take this program for equine professionals if we're not in any way trained as trauma therapists? Or
I love that you dared to ask rudely. Those are the best ones to be authentic. Okay, awesome. Yeah. And there's never a wrong question or a rude question. The only question that is not working is the one you don't ask. So talk. And I would like for Katarina Ali to answer this, because when I originally asked her to help me recording the training, and she'd never been to one of my trainings, so she experienced it initially. This is before we started talking about putting them together. So she experienced my training listening to it while we were recording it. So I'd like for you to answer that.
Okay, and since I also know what I actually did teach Laura and Selga in this training, or is still teaching them, you will learn very much more about trauma. You will have a stronger foundation to stand on. Even if you're not a trauma therapist, you will get the fundamentals of what that is, and the fundamentals. You will recognize some things. So what you've been taught so far is in alignment. What Ilka teaches, that's our eureka moment of like we are doing this double, and why don't we put it together? But I would say half of it would be new for you, which is also reasonable. You only pay half the price to get access to it because you already have some of it. But it's deeper, it's more extensive. You will gain more understanding about some of the things you need to take into consideration working with trauma with horses in this way, also for the humans, because you are there in the team. You will also learn some additional stuff about horses, because Ilka also has a background as a horse person, been working with horses her whole life. So I'm not the only one teaching about horses, and our conversations about them, I think, is quite rich, pertaining to them as horses, but also specifically in this work, of course. And
basically
sorry, I'm interrupting you.
Basically, we become better helpers for the mental professionals.
Yes, sense. You would. And you would understand more about the role of the horse in this and have more ideas about it. So I think it would make you a stronger facilitator in many different ways. And you have the opportunity, because you will have 1 to 3 with the new Model 3 we are launching at the moment. So that one you will already have. So you can actually join the pEATT part of being equine professional if you want to, and learn more from Ilka about the trauma confrontation part. as an equine professional and become what she calls an equine behavioral specialist.
And I will add there, during the trauma confrontation parts, in the regular equine assisted psychotherapy sessions that are not trauma confrontative, the horses are at liberty. Very, very seldomly do we ever, I can't recall, retaining or restricting the horses in any way. They, because again, it's very important that they are contributing at their own free will. During the trauma confrontation parts, that needs to change, because if we take EMDR, there's a set structure to it, to where the horse has restricted liberty. So to ensure their welfare, it does take special ways to get there, to where we're not just leading a horse on a rope and not paying attention to what the horse is saying, but preparing the horse, or preparing the interaction between the equine behavioral specialist and the horse to where they can then accompany a client and a psychotherapist in EMDR. This is what we focus on in module 3 as well. So I think it adds places in the interaction, not just in the facilitation, but then in the directive parts, in the direct interaction with the horses.
So that would make you stronger as an equine professional in the field, being able to do both the stabilization, grounding, and resourcing parts, but also actually work together with certified trauma therapists to do the trauma confrontational part.
So in that sense, the horse has to be prepared as well somehow for the work.
No.
Not just being the horse, but the part that you said, the computational of it.
Does the horse learn? Yes. Is the horse prepared? No. It's the work on the human. This is what I addressed earlier, that my experience is that we have so much, and I don't want to offend anybody. There's great, great, great horse people out there. I have just found that in our perception, that there's room for expansion. So to where the horse can really be, to where the horse can contribute as a horse. Okay, the horse doesn't need to learn. It's best if the horse is not trained for this. The horse will learn due to the experience, for sure. Okay, but we're not training the horse to do this. We're training ourselves.
And to jump in there, it's about that the horse, again, is this complete being that owns their own learning. So they will learn as an active learner.
With in their own speed and time and like and dislike and agency, full agency to the horse.
Yeah, but it does demand, I think, from the equine professional to be able to see horses and to be able to understand horses from this perspective, that they are able to do this without our ideas of how to make them comply or train them in certain ways.
Without our training. It's like, hey, you did good. No.
And I know that both Laura and Selga are excellent horse people, and I've seen them in action. So I think,
nice.
Yeah, we talked about it, and we talked about how to be a safe person for the horse and stuff. So in some sense,
I was only referring to the limited liberty part, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The horse has to know things to feel safe.
Yes.
In that situation, in that limited situation.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good question. And you saw how I responded. It's like when it's so easy to switch into training situations. It is so easy to switch into expecting a certain outcome and losing the presence in the here and now. So I'm very careful as I'm talking about this to not stir more anticipation. Okay, and this is what I'm saying. This entire training from the starting point of module 1 is the perception that we're trying to sensitize people to. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thanks for the awesome question.
Just regarding this military thing that I get interested. Is there any difference how you work with post-traumatic military people? And just I can't say it. I don't know how to just like in everyday people with trauma background or people who come from military conflict situations.
And one needs to differentiate if it's soldiers, if it's members of the armed forces, or if it's people who've experienced war. Okay. So as far as working with members of the armed forces, there's definite differences because the military in itself is such a set structure. It's such a big organization with many, many different rules and hidden. It's
Culture.
Yeah, thank you. It's its own culture. Okay. So when I talk about combat related PTSD, I'm referring to members of the armed forces. As far as people who've experienced trauma due to war, as far as wartime experiences, that does not play that much of a part in it then. Okay. Then whether you have complex PTSD, D needs to be in brackets, but I can't put this in when I talk about it. Okay, sorry. It's my own personal agenda here. I put the disorder in brackets, or at least say dis/order, because PTSD, the symptoms there are natural. It's a natural response to something unnatural. So when we look at wartime afflicted people or people who've sought refuge or who've escaped or who sought asylum, then they adhere again more to the normal categories of trauma. So I'm laughing because it's like trauma is not normal, but there's these classifications that they adhere to, and then trauma does become an overwhelm in the situation. So I hope I addressed your question. This is how I understood your question. Okay. Let me ask you, are you referring to members of the armed forces or are you referring to people who've experienced war?
Well, actually both, because I'm following this Ukrainian psychotherapist, and I was participating in some trainings with her with the war trauma and everything. So she lives in Kiev and she does psychotherapy, and so at the same time, and she talks about both people living in the city and people and. Well, soldiers, it's like probably it's not the right word because these people were like people working in different fields of, I don't know, business or whatever, and now they become soldiers. So it's also, it makes it a little bit more complicated than just.
Yeah. In the training, we focus on those set structures, the set members of the armed forces. Even though we do address some of the incidents that will lead to feeling overwhelmed, but there's such huge cultural differences again, okay? By this training being accessible to people around the world eventually in these languages, the cultural aspects need to continue to be considered, okay?
And then there is also, of course, other categories that are similar, like first responders and people have secondary trauma due to their work, basically. And then you have the refugees that are experiencing trauma directed to them, and they have the displacement part that somebody wouldn't have in another setting, of course. So there is differences to all these groups, but there is also strong similarities.
And now that you mentioned the secondary, so actually it is, so the psychotherapists get traumatized with the stories a lot.
Yeah.
And I just today I was reminded of another component, why I think it is important to have the military part in the training, because being in Europe and trauma, in my opinion, based on what I've researched, being able to be inherited in the sense on the cellular level, being transgenerational, we are all grandchildren of World War II. And that has a huge impact. When I worked in the United States in private practice, returning to Germany, I saw the difference in the population, just in my clients, that World War II having huge effect on the population now. You know, so I think it's even though if one per se does not work with soldiers or war in any means, I think just like I said at the very beginning, war unfortunately is such a big part of our life these days that I think it is helpful, whether it's on a personal or on a societal level, to be aware of these factors.
Yeah, and the fact that we know that if you have a traumatic experience now, often earlier or even in early generations, trauma is triggered, like it comes back. Mm-hmm. So having this bigger context of understanding, I think, is helpful for everyone. I think you have great questions, all of you.
They're awesome.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want us to touch upon before we wrap up for today? And as we said, please reach out if you have other questions later on. We do start a new part 1, May 1. If anyone is interested, I just wanted to emphasize that again. Do you want to say anything more, Ilka, before we wrap up?
I'm just enthused. I was told that Northern European countries are silent listeners, and I am enthused that there was really good questions. I appreciate being given the opportunity to answer, and I appreciate the time. I'm just glad that I was here, and even though this is online, I'm such a person. But so meeting online is weird to me, but I appreciate it. It was a pleasure to meet you all, and I thank you.
Thank you. We were really honored to have you here.
I'm just happy I'm bringing you all together. So that's my part.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, for more learning on all parts, I think. Expanding.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I will say goodbye to you and thank you for being here, all of you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.